Hello and welcome to Magic Concepts, a series where we explore Magic the Gathering concepts starting from zero base knowledge in the game and going all the way through Pro Tour level strategies. In part 2 of this series, we will be covering the primary resource in Magic, mana. If you missed part 1 in this series, feel free to click the link above to catch on up. So nearly every card in Magic requires mana to cast. Some cards require a lot of mana to cast, but their impact on the game is usually well worth it. For example, Graz costs 8 mana in order to cast, but he turns all of your creatures into gigantic 5-power creatures ready to slam in on your opponent's face. In order to cast these potentially game-winning spells, you will need to build a solid base of mana in order to support your deck's strategy. But in order to build this mana base, we need to first understand what it is. So in part 1, we learned that lands produce mana, and this mana can be used to cast spells. However, lands aren't the only way to get mana. As you're building your deck, your mana base will consist not only of your basic lands, but also any other way that your deck can produce mana or find ways to produce mana. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. As a baseline, a deck should be roughly 40% lands. In a standard 60-card deck, that is going to be 24 lands. Some very aggressive decks, which we'll cover in a later video, with very low mana curves, can function with less mana, while others will want to make use of those high-cost, high-impact cards to help finish out a game. In this case, adding additional cards on top of your 24 lands that can help you find those lands will help make sure that you're able to continue playing your land for the turn consistently each turn. However, there are cards other than lands that can produce mana, such as our Armored Scrap Gorger here. As you can see, he will tap to add 1 mana of any color. But because you need an initial mana investment in order to cast him, and it's a lot easier to kill a creature than it is to destroy a land, they don't necessarily equate on a 1-to-1 basis. But you could think of say 2 of these cards equaling out to 1 land in your mana base. The real benefit to these cards is that they act as an additional land drop for your turn, effectively ramping you into higher costing spells by increasing the amount of mana that you can produce each turn. For example, on turn 2 you play your land and cast Scrap Gorger. On turn 3 you can play your 3rd land for the turn, and you now have 4 mana total that you can spend on, say, 2 more Scrap Gorgers. This means that on turn 4, after you play your land for the turn, you now have access to 7 mana. 4 lands plus your 3 creatures. That's almost twice the amount of mana that you're supposed to have or would normally have at this point in the game. Also, if your deck happens to be running multiple colors, let's say your deck is green-red, or even green, red, and white. Nothing is worse than having a hand full of red cards, but only green mana to use. A land like Terramorphic Expanse, while it doesn't produce any mana on its own, can help you find the color that you need. The use of this type of card to help fix those holes in your colors during gameplay is called mana fixing, and is a very important part in a multicolor mana base. But as we're talking about our mana base, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of a mana base are we going to need? For that, we need to look at how mana intensive our deck is by looking at what's called a mana curve. In order to see your deck's mana curve, you would separate your deck into piles based on how much mana it costs. The Scrap Gorger from earlier costs 1 green plus 1 other mana for a total converted mana cost of 2. Once you lay out your entire deck by converted mana cost, you will get piles that look kind of like this graph here. So your average deck will have the most cards around the 2 or 3 CMC range, like we're kind of seeing here. Some decks will run more 1 or 2 costing cards and can afford to cut lands for more action. This is called having a low mana curve. While our deck here we see has a higher mana curve, as we have cards all the way up to the 6 and even 8 mana slot. This means that we will need to consider our mana base very carefully in order for our deck to function correctly. Without a proper mana base in a high curve deck, you could easily find yourself with not enough mana to cast the high costing spells that you need to win the game. This drought of mana is what our mana ramp is designed to fix by finding extra lands, by finding additional mana sources, or even in cards like Ravager here, reducing the cost that some cards cost to cast. But once our ramp is firmly established, we will easily be able to cast our biggest threats and work towards establishing superiority on the battlefield. However, sometimes our mana ramp will work too well, and we will end up with the opposite problem, where we are flooded with mana. In cases like this, it's always a good idea to have cards in your deck that can use extra mana with repeatable abilities, such as King Darien's ability here. For 5 mana, we can put a +1 counter on him and create a soldier token. Because card abilities are at instant speed, unless the card says otherwise, you can wait until your opponent ends their turn and then dump any mana that you haven't used yet into creature abilities on your opponent's end step so that nothing goes to waste. And then a moment later, on your untap step, everything untaps, and you can start your turn with all your mana at your disposal. Abilities like this is often called a mana sink, because you can just throw all of your mana down the drain and still get benefit out of it. So as a quick recap on our mana base, anything that produces mana or finds ways to produce mana is part of your mana base. A mana ramp will help to prevent a mana drought and get you the mana you need to cast your best spells early enough to take over the game. A mana sink, which is a repeatable ability, will help mitigate the risk of getting mana flooded by giving you ways to use any excess mana. Building an effective mana base will help fix your colors so that you always have what you need when you need it and can lead to a huge advantage in game. But rather than tell you how a mana base works, let's show you. Alright, so we've got enough lands here that we can get into our ramp. We do have our mana sink here in case we stall out. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and keep this hand. We'll start off with our Terramorphic Expanse, finding our planes, so that way we can get King Darien down. Opponent looks like they are on black. Ooh, Death Touch. That's bad for me. Alright, so we are going to cast our Scrap Gorger to get our ramp started. Yeah, I am not going to block that Death Toucher. Nope. So I do have 3 mana. So I have 3 mana that I could pop King Darien down, but really I don't need him until I can activate his ability, so once I have 5 mana. If I play my land for the turn, I will have 4 to cast my Hoarding Recluse, because my creature ramped me into it. So a 4-drop on turn 3, not bad. Opponent is still going to come in with their 1/1 Death Touch. I can block, but then the 1 Death Touch will kill my blocker, so I don't really want to do that, because that spider is holding off 2 other attackers. So no blocks, I'll just take the 1 point of damage. Deathbloom Gardener Terramorphic Expanse to get my mount. So now I have 4 mana, 5 mana for next turn. So like next turn I would want to cast Borak, hopefully find another land, play that land for the turn, have that plus Scrap Gorger would be my 3 land for King Darien. So that's my next turn. Okay, opponent is getting a lot of creatures out. That's not good for me. They're still attacking with that Death Toucher. So yeah, I am not going to block it still. So like I said, we're going to Vorak, pray for a land. There we are. We've got our plains. So we will go ahead and put that down. Cast King Darien off of my Scrap Gorger. So here I have my green, white, +1 for King Darien. Alright. So that's going to give me a little bit of a board state. I am not going to attack into that mess because, well, the only thing I can attack with is my Recluse, which is keeping him at bay a little bit. I mean, those rats are still attacking in, but I mean, that's only 1 damage per turn. That's not going to kill me, at least not for 17 more turns. Alright, so now we have 5 mana on board, nothing really to do in hand. So we will drop our Terramorphic Expanse, crack it for, doesn't matter. And we will go to combat. Well, no, we're not going to go to combat, we're just going to pass the turn because I'm not attacking into that board. Whatever I attack with will die. Oh my god, that is not good. Okay. So now with that rat coming in every turn and doing damage to me, that flyer is going to keep growing every turn. So now I really have to block the rat. Luckily, King Darien has an ability that will give me a creature token so that I'm not really losing anything off of my board if I block. So yeah, the Death Touch will kill the token even though it's a 2/2. But, well, the Coldblade grew because my token died instead of the flyer. Oh well, sometimes you just can't win. So we will keep playing lands and keep passing the turn. Let's see, my spider does have reach, which means it can block flyers. So if she does attack in with her flying vampire, my spider can block it. And Sparky's not attacking, which is probably the best idea. Oh shit, I forgot to use King Darien at the end of turn. Well, I'm stupid. So yeah, we'll pass the turn. We'll let opponent do... Oh, murder, that's bad. But it's murder on Vorak, which is good. If that murder was on King Darien, then I would be in trouble. Because King Darien is my mana sink. And I definitely want to keep my mana sink. Oh shoot, I thought that was my opponent's turn. Ha! Oh well. So we'll pass turn again. Sparky has run out of cards in hand, so she really can't do anything against my board state. She might try to attack in, but that would be suicide. So now it is the end of Sparky's turn. So I can now activate King Darien to make a soldier. And I should have enough mana to activate him again to make a second soldier. I mean, I could attack into my opponent's board, but I mean, she's got enough power that whatever I attack in with is probably going to die, and then it will leave me open on the backswing. So, like, once I'm all tapped out from attacking, she could just attack in with everything else and do a bunch of damage to me still. So, my best bet is just to pass the turn.
Thought I saw something.
Sparky does another critter. That is fine. I still don't think Sparky attacks here. That would not be very smart. Sparky is not very smart. So, no cards in hand means that there's no combat tricks. So, let's actually activate Darian now so that I have some extra creatures that I can block with if I want to. We'll proceed to blockers, so we'll block the Coldblade there. Let's see, we'll go ahead and block the zombie because my creature's not going to die. Let's see, and those are 2 power creatures, which would kill my tokens. Well, that would be 4 damage to me, would take me down to 12. I think, oh, well, that would grow the Gorger too. But only 1, and my spider would still be able to kill it, so I think I just make those 3 blocks there. Take some beats. And we'll pass turn. I could attack in and probably do a lot of damage, but I don't really have any reason to. Sparky seems intent on killing herself against my board. If Sparky had any cards in hand, this would make me suspicious, because just attacking with 1 creature. So, but without cards in hand, I know there's no combat trick coming, so I'm free to just block it. And then we'll go ahead and use King Darian's ability to make some more tokens. Alright, so we're really using our mana sink here to use all of our extra mana each turn while we wait to find Graz. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. So if I attack with King Darian here, the most damage Sparky could do is 2, 4, 6, 8. Which means that he would still survive because of how big he's grown from activating his ability all these times. So this is a safe attack. Sparky doesn't block it all and just eats it. Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's going to leave a
Did not expect that. I expected at least a chump block there. So now this time Sparky does have cards in hand, which makes this attack a little suspicious. We are going to go ahead and activate King Darian to make some tokens. So these new soldiers are going to go in front of the scoundrels. And my recluse with reach will block the flyer, because that's the only one that can. And we'll see what happens. No combat tricks, okay. Alright, so we are going to use our prize fight here. So King Darien will fight the zombies. And now we're going to do something tricky. So we haven't found Graz yet, but we have this card, Chaotic Transformation, in our deck. This will allow us to take our treasure artifact and search our deck for another artifact. The only artifact we have is Graz. So he gets cast immediately, and all of my creatures become Juggernauts. I then have the ability with Cabaret Charm to give them all +1/+1 and trample. However, my opponent has no creatures out to block with because she threw them at me willy-nilly earlier in the game. But if she still had her entire board out of all those creatures, using Cabaret Charm here to give them all +1/+1 and trample would assure that this attack was lethal. And so this really kind of showcases how you can use your mana ramp to pull a bunch of lands and get a bunch of mana out of your deck so that you can use your mana sink to create a huge board state, a huge board advantage, drop your big creatures, and just completely steamroll your opponent and get them down to -80 life. Wow. And that is the true power of a solid mana base. So you might be thinking, wow, that deck was awesome. It was amazing. I want to build a deck just like that. And for $5 you can. But I wouldn't recommend it. What you didn't see was the 4 hours of playtesting in order for that to happen. When I played this on the ladder, it did not do very well. So it is a very neat deck, a very good idea. With some tweaking and some changes, it might actually be a good deck. And if you have any ideas on how to do that, please put them in the comment section below. And even though the top end of this deck didn't function exactly how I was hoping it would in reality, the mana base is still solid, and it is still a very important part of any deck that you build, and needs to be considered when you're doing your deck construction. And if you like building weird, janky decks like this, hop on over to my Patreon. You can support my channel for as little as $2 a month. That will get you into my private Discord, where we can actually collaborate on some of these decks, and you can help me build some of the weirdest, wildest, most amazing decks out there that may or may not work. You never know until you try them, and that is the beauty of Magic. There is just so many different wild ideas that you can try, and you never know what the next best deck might be. So, once again, hit that like, comment down below, subscribe to my channel, help me out here, and I will bring you so much more content in the future. And see you next time.